Okay, here we go for Unit 5, Topic 2 of the CED, Settlement Patterns and Survey Methods. So, we've got a rather nebulous essential knowledge for the first one here. We'll get into that. And then a couple of listings. Really pretty straightforward today. I'm glad to say, once I figured out what they were getting after here. Okay. So, agricultural land practices shape land use patterns. In other words, whatever you're growing in an area is going to shape the land use. Okay. That kind of goes without saying. So, to be more specific, I went out and grabbed some very obvious ones after you see them. All right. For example, if you need to terrace farm, like they do in many places in Southwest Asia, this, for rice or whatnot, that is what that looks like. It's going to shape the land use pattern quite a bit. Not just the land use, mind you now, remember land use patterns. So you're going to need to see things like a monoculture in areas where they pretty much just grow one crop, one thing. That's going to be a pattern of one thing for the most part. This is the land use pattern where I grew up in Kansas. Where almost all you saw was wheat. They had to grow a few other things for feed and whatnot. But usually when you looked around, you saw fields growing wheat. I see more corn than I used to when I go home now, but it still is mostly wheat. That's the monoculture. All right, the next one here, irrigation circles. You get these irrigation, the big long and their pivot point, but you see them on wheels, and I should have put a picture of one of those up here too. They move around in long circles. Okay, they're automated, or somebody might have to come out and pull them in some cases, but usually these days they're automated, and this is what you get. And you move it to another spot where the irrigation point's in the middle. These areas in between the circles, they do not get water as much, so you can see that. That's a very clear land use pattern. People often talk about crop circles that aliens have left. Well, here's your for real crop circles. Next thing you're looking at, CRP field. That's a conservation reserve program is what that CRP stands for. A government program where they pay farmers whatever they would make on a plot of land to not use it. And the reason they do that is because of wildlife and, maybe other species other than wildlife. What would that be? You think like insects or whatever that are on a protected or endangered plan here. So they would put them in this area here. You'll see the need for this arise a lot in the area where I live in Saginaw. There's still a lot of unused land close by me. Not as much as further in where we are here in Keller. But just a little further away, and we see this. And when they started building houses, we started seeing more coyotes and more like wild boars and stuff like that coming into town, because this was getting cut off from them as they got rid of it to build houses on. So you'll see that's when the government will step in and say, okay, we're leaving this alone for wildlife. Most of the time, it could also be vegetation patterns for that matter. Lots of times too, that might be endangered. Right, another one here we often think of Holland with this. All right, dikes and polders. The dikes being the walls, and the polders being the area where the water is pumped to, so that they can create some land for farming. A lot of this has been done in a different fashion, like around New Orleans as well, building things up, reclaiming land from the sea for farming. Of course, that's the first places in danger with climate change and rising sea levels, because they were below sea level to start with. And then the last example I gave up here is a little more general. It's where are the homes located? You're going to see, based on what kind of agriculture is practiced, that's going to dictate where the homes are located. This is a good example here. This is really more on another scale. This type of farming, people are close by the land they farm. They pretty much get up, and then there's work for them. And especially if you looked into it, the agricultural practice of subsistence farming, you're almost always going to see the house, the place where the people stay, close by versus some of these other more industrial kind. It might be miles away from their house. They commute in, and the equipment sheds are there, or and I know in my grandfather's case, they drove the equipment to the field, and the fields, were never more than a few miles away. By a few, I mean like 3 or less miles away, so they could drive their combines and their tractors there. So that is where they were going with that. Now, on to the rural settlement programs, and I'm skipping questions because they're very few and straightforward here. These are the three mentioned. Very simple. Shouldn't take much time at all. Now they used in nucleus or something like that for this, so I blotted that out because we call it clustered. Nucleated, I think, is what some places were calling that. Clustered. It's just what it sounds like. The rural settlements are clustered around. You see this more like in Europe, when the people farmed more like in common, when there were common lands, and then people kind of shared that, before the Enclosure Act and all that kind of stuff went down. Linear, okay, usually you see linear more along a waterway, but it would be along a major thoroughfare as well if they needed that to get to market. And what you see more in the United States is dispersed. Right now, there's reasons for why the cluster happened and the linear happened and the dispersed. Lots of them being the fact that these just kind of happened without a plan. The United States is a new enough country and being settled that they were able to kind of say, let's move forward wisely. Kind of like these days, we got city planners and things like that. Versus in those days, things just happened, and by the time they happened, it was a little late to, hey, let's tear everything down and do this as a better plan. Kind of like the keyboard, QWERTY. We can make a better keyboard, but we're stuck with this one because it is what we've got now. All right, it would be really hard to go back and change it. So, rural survey methods. How they come up with these things? Well, there's just 3 different kinds, kind of like with the other kind here. This is literally, like I said, coming up with it as they went. So back in the day, in England, as somebody would buy a piece of land, they would say your land starts at the walnut tree to the twin oaks, to the boulder, to the tip of Smith Lake. That is your land. Okay, that's just how they did it. No one thought, well, what's going to happen when these trees die, or the lake dries up, or maybe even somebody comes and gets the boulder, right? That's the meat being, or the met, however that's pronounced, is kind of the smaller part. We need to do a bound. All right, that was a large part, just using landmarks. If you're going to go out and do something in the backyard and say, okay, we're going to have capture the flag. Your area is from the tree to the swimming pool to the garden. And my area is something, something, something. That's how they did it back in the day. All right, so along comes the United States, and they're doing this when they first settle because that's what they know. And then when they become a country, one of my favorite people, Thomas Jefferson, says, hey, I got this idea. He's the guy who gave us our monetary system and many of these other things that just make more sense to do. Let's go about this wisely. So all of the Western lands are divided, including where we are here. You can find out what township you're in by looking it up on Google. Okay. 6 miles by 6 miles. And then they were broken up into sections. Each one of these sections is a square mile apiece. And that's how land was allotted. It was usually not each whole square mile, but within that, they would tell you this is where your land is, it's this part and that part. It was based on more of a latitude and longitude type system rather than these things that are changeable. Much more absolute than relative. Okay, so the French, they had a system when they settled and they did this in France too, but where it's really predominant is when French settlements, as they came to the United States, they came up with this long lot system. Well, if you did this in an area around a waterway, the areas, the squares that the river runs through, the waterway runs through, those are immensely valuable versus these people back here are all cut off. So they put their farming plots where they tried to maximize the amount of tracts that would have water access for order shipping and whatnot. So those are the three systems there. Be vaguely familiar with all three of them, as well as with the settlement patterns before it, and even before that, be able to name some of those. Because the main things I saw was, cause. What caused the long line? Well, they wanted water access. What caused this? Trying to be methodical. This also plays into why in the United States farms are more dispersed rather than clustered, because they didn't have to be right on top of each other. There was a plan instead of saying, you go out and find your farm somewhere in this area, and they do this stuff, and they all end up right by each other. They can find an absolute spot. Advantages and disadvantages to each of them. Okay. I think you can figure that out. All right, so that is Unit 5, Topic 2. Thank you very much.